up, gang? Let's try this again. Thanks for listening and watching and hopefully chatting with the Undiplomatic Podcast. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Van Jackson. Holy fuck. If you're going to be catching this right now, hopefully you can hear me. And just as a heads up, I was live streaming just a second ago and my fucking audio wasn't connecting, but I've hopefully troubleshooted it and hopefully it's all fixed now. Time will tell if I'm speaking into the void and literally nobody can hear me. That would be a fucking problem. So, where was I? Oh, Happy New Year. That was my initial message. I was wondering what other people were doing for New Year. Wondering if you were hungover. I don't really drink, but I'm an elder millennial, so I go to bed early, dutifully early. And I had breakfast tacos for New Year's. It was bomb. I had never had a breakfast taco in my life, and yes, baby. Here we go. You can fucking hear me. That's the first step to a successful podcast is being able to fucking hear the person. All right. So, step one complete. Before you know it, I'll be conquering the world. All right. So, I had never had a breakfast taco in my life until I joined the military. And then Air Force basic training is in San Antonio, Texas, right? And so big like Tex-Mex culture. I had a breakfast burrito there, and I was like, "Oh my god, what have I been missing?" And then my first duty station was this language school called the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. Kind of changed my life in many ways. I kind of experienced what the good life was in Monterey for for like literally the first time ever. And I was there to study Korean. Basically, my only job was like march around, iron my uniform, work out, and learn Korean, and for like a year and a half. And Monterey had been the Spanish Empire's California capital before America literally ganked it, took it. So a lot of Spanish and Mexican culture there, and it's like and the Mexican immigrants there give it like a real organic kind of Spanish flavor, and part of that flavor was bomb ass breakfast burritos, and so I got addicted to them there, and it's been part of my life ever since. So on New Year's we had fucking breakfast burritos, breakfast tacos, and it's hard to make them well in New Zealand because we don't have all the ingredients for it. But that's how I spent my New Year's. Hopefully, y'all didn't get hungover, and hopefully you're fine now. So, all right, what I wanted to share initially was I haven't plugged it. Oh, by the way, if you want to help support the show, keep the lights on and the audio flowing, un-diplomatic.com. That's the newsletter, but I also share Twitch notifications for the live streams. I push out episodes of the show, all of that. The one thing I wanted to say that I have not mentioned on the live streams yet is that I host a second show called the Bang Bang Podcast, and it's a show about war movies and military movies and like war adjacent movies, but with an anti-imperialist twist. So my co-host is Lyle Jeremy Rubin. I don't know if you guys know him. He wrote an award-winning book a couple years ago called "Pain is Weakness Leaving the Body," and the book, "A Marine's Unbecoming," and that book really explained his evolution from what was literally a neocon point of view growing up and a right-wing intellectual sort of in college to becoming this anti-imperialist leftist with like good socialist politics and that kind of thing. Anyway, we host the show together. It's super fun, and we crack each other up, but we take these we have street cred as military veterans, but we're also like really staunch anti-war advocates. And so we kind of blend that, and we're both PhD havers, right? And we are not film critics by any stretch. We don't pretend to be, but we grew up, especially in the military, the culture, everybody knows, or people who've been in the military know, you spend tons of downtime in the military. Like there's times when you're in emergency mode, but mostly you're in hurry up and wait mode. And so you spend a lot of time reading and watching. I don't know if anybody reads anymore, but like watching movies, you know. And in my day, it's DVDs, but you spend so much time consuming film, cinema, you know. And so war movies was like the main thing that we would watch over and over and over. If you're a bro, you grew up on war movies and action thrillers and war adjacent stuff. And so those cultural objects that we all sort of know or love or roll our eyes at, but like we're familiar with it either way, we take that shit and then we like view it through the lens of anti-militarism, anti-imperialism. How much does this function as propaganda? What does this say about the historical moment when the movie came out? All that stuff, right? Very fun conversation. And the site for that, by the way, is bangbangpod.com. It's just that simple. But what I wanted to share is just a little clip from that, the most recent episode. We had Alex McCoy on, who's also an anti-war Marine Corps veteran, and he was one of the co-founders of Common Defense, which is like this progressive veterans group against war. And he was our guest on the most recent episode where we talked about Ender's Game. Super fun episode. And so I want to just share a clip of that because we talk, we debate, and we do not agree about the politics of Ender's Game. Right. So this is part of the spiel from the episode. I'm reading this now because I haven't seen it in like 10 years as this kind of right coded, reactionary coded universe. And it becomes much more obvious when you start thinking about population control. They put chips in your head. You have no civil liberties. They surveil your emails. You know, it's a world built on externalizing violence. And
really, that's not supposed to be good. I mean, we're led to not empathize with that ultimately.
You know, it's funny because I think all three of us have different takes on what ideology the book is portraying. Like, you know, Van,
I can only
you're like, this is right wing. You know, Lyle, you're like, it's you know, a critique. It's a left wing critique.
The movie is. I cannot speak to the book.
I think the movie is very liberal internationalist in its politics.
I can't remember if I mentioned this, but this is about Ender's Game. So the Orson Scott Card book from like 1985 or so, and then it became a movie in 2013 starring Harrison Ford, Viola Davis, actually like a bunch of famous people. But basically, like it's a world, Ender's Game, where the world itself, Earth, has become like a fascist one world government planet. It's amazing. Oh, thank you for sharing that link. And the amazing in the worst way. And so the reason the world became fascist and sort of unified that way was to deal with an external aggressor, right? So, okay, we're in geopolitics, foreign policy. Immediately, this is my fucking wheelhouse, right? And so there's these bug species called the Formics who initially try to invade the Earth, and then they get repelled by luck. Mazer Rackham, this superhero military pilot on Earth, happens to figure out a way to destroy the incoming Formic fleet, and that's just kind of it. Like then the bugs go away, and then where the movie starts and where the book kind of starts is in the Earth. I keep wanting to say America, but I mean the Earth. Like they're in the middle of planning and plotting how to take the fight to the enemy, if you will, right? And so they think that they're trying to secure the Earth from this invading horde, but actually Earth is going on the offensive and going way out to these whatever galaxy where the Formics are and going to attack them. And the whole like that's the world building aspect of it. What's actually going on is that we see in the film and in the story is following Ender Wiggin and his time going through military academy for kids, basically, because in this world drones are piloted by kids because kids have the sort of like flexible, malleable, fast twitch brains, like a Twitch gamer, if you will. And they are able to remotely pilot drone swarms that are used to fight in outer space against the Formics. And so going through fleet school and the various trainings that you see, and again, this is for a fascist world, you see Ender Wiggin emerge as the preeminent strategist. And he's the one who is the protagonist in this first one. And so there's a lot going on here. Super interesting for people who are interested in strategy, or if you're just a geopolitical thinker, tales of morality, etc. So we were parsing that, but we were trying to figure out what the politics of the actual story are, and that's what we're debating here.
Yeah, sure.
So to me, that is right wing, though. It's like you put the I was gonna mention this. Like they have the Muslim kid, Assalamu alaikum. They have the Spanish kid saying bendejo. They have the hero Mazer Rackham. He's Maori and he wears the face tattoos.
But who's the chosen one? The nice suburban white kid from America. Like, I gotta make sure that he's the chosen one, right?
Special boys always white kid from the suburbs.
Interestingly, no gay kids.
Well, let's not push it.
Well, they're like 11.
So none of us doubted that Alex McCoy is like a big Ender's Game head. Like he's a stan, even though he's an anti-war guy, right? And so we all agreed that it was a fascist world that was being depicted. Lyle's read, my co-host, was that it was I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story, but like he thought this was like an anti-war treatise. Like this was a warning or a critique of the fascist logic that was being depicted. So I appreciate that, man. Yes. If you ever hear me muted or something, definitely let me know. I disagree with Lyle immensely. I didn't think that this movie or the book read as an anti-war critique, but Alex McCoy, the guest, he thought it was liberal internationalist, not sort of like right-wing fascist cultural object or whatever, this story. And like I said, like I think liberal internationalism in certain variants can be the lipstick on the pig of a kind of fascism. They did a symbolic identity politics. That's what I was talking about in the clip. Like it was multiracial, multicultural. It was a cosmopolitan kind of fascism. And if it's going to be the unity of the earth, like it kind of has to be, Yeah. Orson Scott Card himself, he's apparently a Mormon elite, like an ancestor of Joseph Smith or something. That was what we found out in the background research. And yeah, kind of a transphobe. And you don't see any sexuality in the politics whatsoever. But part of that is because it's kids, so like it's outside of the scope. And maybe that was the point, like keep it pre-sexual, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. This is one of the funny things that we end up doing on this show, Bang Bang, a lot, is debating how to interpret these various films, these various cultural objects, because it's like, I don't know, up for grabs. And like, Lyle and I have similar politics, and we have the same purpose in the show, and we've seen all these same movies, The Siege and Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and all that. And yet when we watch them sort of together and then discuss them, we find that like we're taking away different lessons, if you will, or like what's being communicated here, like what's the symbolism, what's the critique. And that, I suppose, is a little bit damning for the hopes that like culture will be the source of the revolution or whatever, like too easily appropriated by people who don't share your project. But anyway, that's the Bang Bang podcast. I thought that would be a nice way to warm up in the new year. The next episode that's coming out of that show is going to be on Paths of Glory with our guest Daniel Larison, who has a newsletter called Eunomia. He's also kind of like he's a right-wing guy, like a conservative guy, which is obviously like not my shit, but he's an anti-imperialist. And so we end up having these like kind of interesting conversations and not debates, but like convergences about foreign policy. Like he's kind of a realist. He's like very principled anti-war. Like he doesn't think America has any business fighting wars abroad, and he's a humanitarian in how he talks about this. So like if I didn't know his background, I would assume that he's a fucking leftist, and that's a fascinating realignment politically. And in a little bit later in the show today, I'm going to talk about that in the Bernie context, because Bernie had a very anti-Cenk Uygur approach to political alignment, reaching across the aisle, very different approach than what Cenk had last week. And I think that's worth comparing notes on and talking about. So I'll do that a little bit later. The first like newsy topic today is very disappointing, as most foreign policy things are. This is about Yemen. So as most of you probably know, Saudi Arabia has been waging a war against Yemen. Should be illegal, like on unjust pretenses, since 2014, 2015. And this entire time, America had been supporting the Saudi war in Yemen through military assistance, military intelligence, military aid. But America had not been like leading the bombing, and that's starting to change. So check out this clip. And what I'm about to show you is the capital, Sana'a. So this is pretty fucked. Dude, this is US and UK bomb. This happened yesterday.
udah. Naik. Allah. Ayo, خلينا نضربه. أمانة أنا شفتها أمانة.
All right, you get the point. Smoking rubble. For real. So that's a 2,500-year-old capital, an ancient capital, right? And this is happening. This is US and UK bombs. That wasn't Saudi Arabia that did that. That was the US, right? And the reason this is happening is because Yemen refuses to accept Israel's genocide of Palestinians, right? This is an illegal war. The US military, Biden, does not have the authorization to be conducting combat operations for this long without congressional approval. Just Foreign Policy, the publication, has a good piece about this. I'll try to share it in the show notes if I remember. But they talk about this is literally, functionally an illegal war, right? And basically, we're working for Saudi Arabia and Israel now. We have a foreign policy of fucking murder and bombs, and it isn't even our own. This is the forever wars continued. Like, can't stop, won't stop. Saudi Arabia has been doing this since 2015, and we've been helping, but now we're dropping the bombs for them. This is fucked. And this is again like low-hanging fruit for the Trump administration, because if they if the Trump administration wants to continue bombing or supporting bombing of any country in the Middle East, they can, and they will be lined up with the Biden administration, and it will be hard for the Democrats to critique it, because it's like, we were already doing this shit under Biden. And so we're undermining our ability to provide a valid critique, to serve as a valid opposition to Trump, should he want to continue all of these various bombings and shit. And if Trump wants to turn these things off because they're expensive and illegal and unjust, and therefore it would be politically popular to stop bombing another goddamn country, he's going to look like the peacemaker. So it's like, how many times do I got to say this? The Democrats are like, playing tic-tac-toe while the game of 3D chess is being, like, Trump looks like he's playing 3D chess while the Democrats play tic-tac-toe. Like, they're just wildly incompetent about this stuff. So I don't think, I don't know. I'm not sure what the Trump administration is going to do about Yemen. It seems to me that, like, on purely financial interest grounds, they're going to keep supporting a kind of Saudi-led and Israel-led war on Yemen, or maybe outsourced to the UK. Like, I don't think the fucking war is going to stop. I don't think the bombing is going to stop. And the tragedy of that, aside from being illegal and unjust and being in defense of an ongoing genocide, is really like, you're destroying like an ancient cultural site. This is, again, like a city that's older than time, So this is fucked. And it's not like, I don't know what the Democrats are thinking. Like, good, if you're a corrupt Democrat who just knows that you're corrupt, I totally get how you could sell out humanity and sell out the country and sell out your party in order to keep getting money, or keep being on the take, or keep getting support for your reelection campaign. I get that evil, cynical calculation, but I think a lot of Democratic politicians think that they're good people. And like, that's the fucked part. Well, that's one of the fucked parts. So I don't know. Yeah, you were fucking with me. Yes, you were fucking with me. So, man, all right. The next story, this is bullshit. There's no video for it, but it's because of what the story is, which is the Puerto Rico blackout, right? So it was the electricity grid got overwhelmed, and Puerto Rico was projected to be without power for a couple days, including over New Year's, including right now. And that's pretty fucked up. And what's kind of hilarious is that Richie Torres, who is on the take from AIPAC, and he's kind of like he's been like a really, I mean, I would call him a Zionist, but like, he's functionally a Zionist, let's say. But he's on the take from AIPAC for sure. He's been a huge supporter of Israel. But he's also Puerto Rican by birth. and he spoke out on this. Let me see if I can like share his tweet. He said some things that made sense, but it was like a very blinkered point of view because he doesn't extend his critique of America when it comes to Puerto Rico. He leaves it narrowly focused on Puerto Rico per se, instead of recognizing that this perspective, this point of view applies elsewhere, right? Applies to the Palestinian situation, in fact. So this is his tweet. Almost all of Puerto Rico has no electricity on New Year's Eve. The failing grid in Puerto Rico is the single worst infrastructure crisis in the United States. I would bet that MAGA doesn't count Puerto Rico as part of the United States. But anyways, the 3 million American citizens of Puerto Rico have no right to vote in federal elections. Puerto Rico has no representation in the Electoral College, the House, or the Senate. It is a colony of the United States, and its failing grid is a symptom of its second-class status. So this is real shit. It's a real problem, you know. But the point of view that Richie, you know, I don't ever shout out Richie Torres on this show. So, and I'm not about to now either, but he's saying some correct things. Two things to point out here about this, you know, one, this is coloniality and neoliberalism converging in Puerto Rico, right? The Associated Press had a piece in 2023. So just last year, well, a year and a half ago now. But in that 2023 piece, they said, quote, Puerto Rico privatized its electricity production, selecting Genera PR to take over the operation and maintenance of state power generation units in the U.S. territory as part of a $22.5 million annual contract. Genera PR is a subsidiary of a New York-based New Fortress Energy, which works closely with Shell Oil and other gas producers. So, it says, privatizing the transmission and distribution of power in June 2021, that's when the decision was taken initially to privatize Puerto Rico's electricity grid. It did not lead to an improvement in issues, including the length of outages, which has worsened between 2021 and 2023. The power situation on the island is so dire that the U.S. government recently announced it would supply temporary electric generation via barges and land-based generators. That's in 2023. What I'm saying is, it's not a new problem. It is directly a consequence of privatizing the electricity grid. And even though like a self-governed Puerto Rico might also choose to privatize its electricity grid, it would probably choose to privatize it not by a New York-based firm, right? And it would have to be politically accountable to its people for that decision. Currently, it doesn't have to be politically accountable for it because it's the federal U.S. government runs Puerto Rico, right? Puerto Rico is a colony. And AOC had legislation actually last year that was called I think it was called the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act or some shit. And the idea is look, Puerto Rico has or should have the right to decide if it wants to be a 51st state, formally part of the federal system, including all the rights and obligations that come with that, or if it wants to be independent, you know, or if it wants to be a third thing, which is kind of in between, which is called free association, which is when you self-govern on domestic policy, but on stuff that counts as foreign policy or national security, you give up your sovereignty and you transfer it to another power. Yes, that's very imperial. But this is what the thing that I'm trying to preach here, and this is the second thing I have to say about this Puerto Rico blackout shit. And again, the blackout is the consequence of ongoing colonialism, which has facilitated a neoliberal set of economic policies. And that's why the electric grid, is privatized and therefore not accountable. And therefore you let it go out, you let it overload because you underinvest, because you don't actually care about the fucking people. You've privatized a public good. So the second thing I wanted to say about this was like Puerto Rico's situation is better known to people in New York and Florida than the situation in the Pacific Islands. But a fully 1/3 of the Pacific region is non-sovereign, a non-sovereign Pacific. It's the same kind of arrangement that the US has with Puerto Rico. This is imperialism like right now, colonialism right now, right? Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa are all in the literal exact status of non-sovereign coloniality as Puerto Rico. AOC's self-determination for Puerto Rico Act, where I read the whole bill, all of it applies to Guam, CNMI, the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. There's no reason to exclude them other than having a blind spot, not realizing that the situations are exactly the same. And if the situations are the same, if you're in an objective position of oppression, you have a solidarity of position. And so you ought to act like that. We ought to have that consciousness, and we ought to advocate on that basis, right? There's a power block here because these countries are commonly denied equality, and so they're commonly denied self-determination. And the non-sovereign Pacific consists of more than just these countries that are colonies. It also consists of New Caledonia and French Polynesia, which are French colonies, right? France has been fighting in New Caledonia basically to make sure that they don't have self-determination. And then there are a bunch of semi-sovereign, halfway sovereign countries in the Pacific, the freely associated quote unquote states, Palau, the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia. All of these places are denied full sovereignty, full independence. Some of them, Guam, CNMI, and American Samoa and Puerto Rico, are denied self-determination fully, full stop, no caveats. And so we owe. Something's got to be done about it, Anyway, so that's that. What do we got next? Bernie, baby. Bernie, fucking, he's a pretty good politician. I don't know if you heard. So let me see if I can share this. Okay, so here we go. This is, I should say as a preface, Bernie so I've talked about political realignment, especially around foreign policy. I wrote a thing about that recently that I might talk about another time. But last live stream, last week, I'm losing track of time, the Mark Lamont Hill show, Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks went on it and basically tried to apologize for Charlie Kirk, Turning Points USA, the pretty far right platform media stuff. And Cenk went into that lion's den and did not challenge the lions, and refused on Mark Lamont Hill's show to even identify their politics as having white supremacist characteristics, right? And Cenk has been roasted by everybody everywhere, in left media and progressive media and stuff. And so I talked about that. I thought there's something correct about trying to reach out to MAGA, national conservatives, trying to reach out to the right in certain ways, or being willing to work with them in certain contexts. But there's ways to really fuck that up, and Cenk fucked it up. And so what Bernie is talking about here, this is a clip from the Jon Stewart podcast. This is different, and this is much better. So let's check it out.
Some things that Trump said, some things that Elon Musk said, some things that Robert Kennedy said, that make sense. But overall, I think it's very clear, Trump is appointing his billionaire friends to the important positions in the cabinet, and his job is to represent the billionaire class, with some exceptions. He's going to have to walk a bit of a tightrope because he's made promises to working class people. And I think what my job, and people in Congress who share my views, not too many, is to say, okay, Mr. Trump, you talked about a 10% cap on interest rates for credit cards. That's a great idea. Well, you know what, John? I'm going to introduce that legislation. Let's see how far it goes. For years now, I have understood, as most Americans have, that the defense budget is bloated, that many of the major defense contractors engage in fraud and waste, massive cost overruns. All right, I have legislation in to cut military spending by 10%. Recently, you may have noticed Elon Musk came out and said, you know what? We should be cutting military spending. How many Republicans will go along? So when they say good things and appropriate things, I think we should work with.
When they say good things and appropriate things, I think we should work with them. Cutting the defense budget, one example. I cannot possibly imagine that actually happening. But if it comes to fruition, we should be down for that. We should be on board with that, and capping interest rates on credit cards at 10%. That's pro worker. You know what I mean? Big time.
With them.
Oh, that's the whole fucking clip. There we go. So, yeah, that's how you do it. That's fucking smart. And I mean, so my first credit card when I was like 18 years old and in the military, this is insane in hindsight, and it should be punishable by death, but my interest rate was 46%, and I was an enlisted airman at the time, and the credit card was like a Visa card through the like base exchange. Like it was basically like, it was kind of like a military credit card or something. 46% interest rates, dude. And when I was junior enlisted, all my peers, people at the bottom of the hierarchy, most of them really, like, we got paid okay. Our pay was decent. We were, for not having college degrees, most of us, we were taking home in 2001 dollars, we were taking home like, I don't know, between $3,000 and $5,000 a month or something like that. It was like not bad, but we were getting credit cards for the first time. We were not financially literate, and the interest rates that we were being charged was usurious as fuck. And so, if we're getting charged 46% and we're using credit cards to buy rims for our cars and stupid shit, like, then, going out and just like spending at the bar and stuff like that, we max out our credit cards, and then we end up like in serious debt distress, and a bunch of my friends went like bankrupt, and that ruins them. And so like their financial lives are ruined very early in their careers. And what's super fucked about that is many of them ended up choosing to re-enlist, because so they served their 4 years or their 6 years, and then they re-upped, and then they re-upped, and then they re-upped. And part of that is because it's like scary to transition out of the military. And it was scary for me too, even though I was determined to get the fuck out of there. But part of it is like there's a financial dependency. It's kind of like a very personalized military Keynesianism. Like you're trapped, and they had to keep paying off those debts. The re-enlisting was like the most direct and easiest way to keep paying off the debts that they had accrued. So you've got this debt albatross, and a lot of people joined the military in the first place as a way to help pay off college loans. Like they went to college for a year or two, accumulated $50K, $60K, $80K in debt. And then they realized like, oh, well, maybe college isn't for me, or I need to come back later, or it's too fucking expensive. But either way, you're carrying huge debt loads. And joining the military was one way of paying that back. And yet you get in, the military, and then the base exchange is giving you these fucking credit cards with 46% interest rates. I'm sure it's got to be lower now. Like, it's so evil, like the shit that they got away with in the war on terror. Anyway, capping interest rates on credit cards at 10%. What would be the argument against that? In a non-oligarchy, in a real functioning democracy, this is a no-brainer. This is what economic populism looks like. Common sense policies that restrict and or discipline capital and that benefit workers in general. That's economic populism. And there's a reason why it's popular. And it says a lot about the country and its politics that it has not yet happened. So we'll see if it does. My larger point is just that Bernie is doing this shit right. Like, you're reaching across the aisle, not for the symbolic bipartisan appearance of it, not so that you can like symbolically hold hands and say we're unified. That's the Cenk thing. That's the Cenk Uygur thing. Bernie is like not wanting to hold hands at all symbolically, but he's like, look, if you want to work with me to do something good for workers, let's fucking do it. Let's go. Okay, that's good. This is the lesson. That's how it works. Great. So shout out to Bernie. Next story. I don't know if you guys know the ASPI, Australia Strategic Policy Institute. So this is, let me see. This article just came out. It's pretty bullshit. Sydney Morning Herald. So, God damn it. Basically, it's not a good article, but the article talks about how ASPI, the Australia Strategic Policy Institute, and a couple other extremely hawkish think tanks in Australia are losing some government funding. So in Australia, there's a lot of public money available for research institutions, and some of that public money, the Australian intellectuals don't think so, but relative to the United States, there's a lot of money available from the government. And in Australia, they call like foreign policy stuff a lot of times strategic policy. That's their phrase. And like, I find that to be kind of nonsensical, but there's like a $40 million pot of strategic policy research money that they distribute across a number of research institutions. Some of them are at universities, like at Australian National University. They have a national security college, and then some of them are to the think tanks. And the two biggest think tanks in Australia are the Lowy Institute and ASPI, Australia Strategic Policy Institute. So ASPI, over the years, it started out as nonpartisan, and technically it still is, but it's like veered right pretty hard. And in the last 10 years, it's become basically a mouthpiece for the defense industry. And not even just the Australian defense industry, but like, Lockheed and Boeing money type shit. Like for the American defense industry, like the global defense industry. And how one way to advocate for defense industrial interests is to talk about the latest missile or nitnoid stuff about, operational constraints on like nuclear powered submarines or the latest acquisition contract, like technical, boring stuff. Another way to advocate for those same interests is to hype the shit out of the threats that defense stuff responds to. And that's a lot of what they do. They're extremely well known as a basically disreputable anti-China think tank. They have been the leading edge of hyping the China threat, and it's the reason they've been a mouthpiece for the government in the past when it was a right-wing government, the previous government. But like they just do scare tactics, scaremongering, right? Defense industrial propaganda. And analytically, 90% of what they do is a joke. And there's one project there that like tracks Chinese oppression of Uyghurs, and it's like pretty good for obvious reasons. Chinese oppression of Uyghurs is real. And so there's evidence to work with, and they track the evidence, but you can imagine why they track that evidence. Not necessarily because they're concerned with the plight of human beings everywhere, but because focusing on what's happening to Uyghurs is good for business because it adds to the China panic in Australia. And up until recently, Australia has been like hyperbolically bad on China, hyperbolically aggressive, transgressive about China, And so anyways, ASPI is losing some funding from the government. The Sydney Morning Herald story, that's what it's about. But it's very jaundiced in its presentation. So the current Labor government it's not cutting only money to ASPI, it's cutting money to a lot of other places too. But among these, like out of a $40 million pot of money, ASPI gets 7.5 million. That's more than any other institution in this pot of money. And it's not the only source of its funding. So ASPI, where is it? They get core funding from the government, right? So, I think it's like $4 million of core funding each year. And then they're getting $7.5 million overall right now. But over the years, like the past 20 years, they've picked up 166 government contracts with the Australian government that have been worth more than $40 million. And to really drive the point home about its partisanship and its hawkishness, it's like irrational exuberance about the China threat. In 2022, ASPI opened a Washington office, and they paid for it with a $5 million grant from Australia's defense minister. At the time, it was Peter Dutton. And he said at the time, he wants ASPI Washington office to become the go-to place in Washington for think tank perspectives on Australian defense and security policy. That is like, there's no more smoking gun than that about the collusion between private and public. That there's like that ASPI is anything other than the right-wing government mouthpiece is really hard to square with what Peter Dutton himself fucking said. And everybody in the think tank world knows all this anyways. They just feel some type of way about it, for or against, depending on their actual politics. So there's in the chat, is the logical endpoint of mainstream Australian security policy to become a US state? Beautiful question. No, sort of. Like, yes and no. In Australia and in New Zealand, the right-wing perspective is very much like, it's reactionary, but it's reactionary in an imperial way. So it takes the form of like imperial nostalgia. And in fact, when Australia and New Zealand became independent nations, the governing elites of these nations, for the most part, were very opposed to their own national independence. They identified so hard with the British Empire, so hard, that they didn't even want to become independent, but the mothership was like, it's time to go, and so that's pretty fucked. And so like, that's how, so you cannot formally be wistful for empire, but you can like celebrate it in more and lament and wish for it in low key ways. And one of the modern ways that finds expression is in embracing traditional partners, quote unquote, like the US, the white West Anglo world. So that's one way that this imperial nostalgia finds expression. The other way is in an overlapping source, which is the great power competition itself. You talk about traditional geopolitics, great power competition, hyping up the China threat is part of an imperial mindset, and even like a racialized mindset. So that's kind of a problem, and so I wouldn't say that like Australia wants to be a 51st state necessarily, but it does want to be part of a America-centric empire. It really like Australian foreign policy wishes so hard, it works so hard explicitly on behalf of American primacy, which is a dead project. It's a dangerous project, but it aligns well with like Washington foreign policy up until now. And Australia national security elites seem to be unfazed by the prospect of like American fascist foreign policy, Trumperialism. They still want to support American primacy, come what may. America's foreign policy supports a genocide. So what? Let's double down on it, triple down on it. Like they have an identity-based affinity for America. They have an America fetish, and it overrides Australian rationality about world politics, about their own interests, pretty fucked. So like the Australian right, the New Zealand right is willing to throw the large numbers of the bodies of their own citizens into a furnace on behalf of American power, because that's what fetishes do. They're an addict to American power. It's hard not to see that as racialized on some level or as cultural on some level, but either way, if it was on offer for Australia to become the 51st state, I think the national security bros would probably mostly jump at it. But I think what they really want is to have some sort of like imperialistic ordering construct. And that's why they used to talk. I mean, they still talk so much about quote unquote rules-based international order, because that's like a thinly sanitized re-expression of American empire. The distance between rules-based international order and just imperialism is not very far, especially for like a 21st century version of imperialism. So thinking and talking about great powers is like the shibboleths of this way of thinking, and it's a shame because like there's a populist politics to be had in Australia and New Zealand about being independent from America, especially at a time when America has gone off the rails and is like very obviously a oligarchy full of white nationalists, and that's fully corrupt, and that it does bad judgment in foreign policy over and over and over. So Australia and New Zealand possibly first among auxiliaries of U.S. power. So that's that. The thing I wanted to mention too about the Aspie stuff is that like Aspie gets a bunch of money, I think $5 million still, from defense industry, including like American defense industry. And they're still able to compete. The headline story, where is it? This story shows that like Aspie is getting its budget cut, and it tries to make it seem scandalous. But Aspie is getting the lion's share of this research money, so it's good to have it more evenly distributed. B, Australia, I mean, Aspie is like the most hawkish think tank in Australia, sure. But this cut is not actually like denying the funds to ASPI. It's making them available via like competitive bids. So one of the criticisms of this strategic policy research funding from the government in general was that like it's too arbitrary. It's too manipulable by politics itself. Like it's unaccountable. And so making the research bids competitive among institutions is supposed to be a form of accountability. And this article actually like flips that logic on its head, which is a shame. But C, ASPI has other sources of money, including the actual literal defense industry. You know, go to its website and look at who sponsors it, you know, like, so they're not like out of business. And even this, like, the Washington office for ASPI that was started funding with the $5 million grant in 2022, that's being defunded, sort of. But that just means that the grant is not automatically given to them in exchange for nothing. It means that if they want the money, they have to compete for it and bid for it against other think tanks. And that's when their quality of their analysis is actually going to matter. And they can't just poop out shit propaganda, anti-China propaganda shit, and ultimately, if ASPI wants to keep its Washington office open, it has other sources of money that it can do that with. So this is very exaggerated. The critique, the fear mongering, like this piece makes it sound like, cancel culture came to the national security think tank world or something. And that's just not so. That's not what's happening fucking at all. And if you talk to Australian scholars, like international relations scholars, all of them who are not China hawks, just normal scholars trying to do their shit, they're not especially partisan people. Most of them don't even like think in left-right terms, like they're pretty like pragmatic ideologically. They have horror story after horror story about Australian intelligence censoring them, surveilling them, intimidating them, coming to their house and trying to interview them about Chinese students in their classrooms and shit. If they happen to take a trip to China or to parts of Asia where they might have a Chinese person in a meeting that they had, then they're having to they're being encouraged or cajoled into reporting it to Australian intelligence. It's an extremely repressive, anti-China hawk, Cold War liberal style environment in Australia. And some Australian scholars, Amy King, have started coming forward with pretty nightmarish stories about their own run-ins with the government. There's one university in Australia that has officially taken a public stance in support of AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US defense trilateral boondoggle, like the most expensive defense project in Australian history in peacetime. And a university has come out explicitly in favor of it and said, how can we help? As part of their charter or their mission or whatever. That's fucked. That's not free speech. There's scholars there who don't support AUKUS, but their institution supports AUKUS. What do you do with that? You got Australian intelligence coming at you. You've got the think tanks and the mouthpieces and the media who are taking pull quotes from the think tankers, all hyping up the China threat. And so you have to come back ultimately to the question, who benefits from this shit? Well, the defense industrialists benefit from this shit. And the right-wing political parties benefit from this shit. But like nobody else. Nobody else. So this is anti-worker, anti-democratic stuff, in my view. To hype up the China threat, to deliberately focus on it and inflate it, is anti-democratic, in my view. And that is part of the argument that we make in The Rivalry Peril, coming out in 3 weeks. Okay. So What else do we got? Yeah, my chat is upside down. What the fuck? That's funny. I wonder if there's a way I can fix that. I don't know. I know a lot of people use Streamlabs on their streams on Twitch. I use Restream because it gives me sweet, sweet features like the crawler at the bottom. And so it's this like pick your poison thing, you know. Would you rather have an upside down chat, but you get a crawler? That's clearly my choice for now. Or would you rather have the stock, you know, Streamlab presentation? I don't know. Maybe I'll change it. We'll see. So yeah. Okay. This next story is pretty fucked. Okay. This is about Israel's AI slaughter going on in Gaza. And there's actually a lot to say about this. Let me play this clip first. So this comes from this clip is of Ronan Bergman, who is a writer for the New York Times. He's a journalist. He writes all kinds of shit, but he's like tends to be extremely sort of pro-Israel and of course focused on military stuff. And in fact, he worked in a previous life in Israeli military intelligence. It's like it's on his Wikipedia page. But anyway, if you haven't heard, shortly after the war, the genocide in Gaza kicked off, there was an article in 972 magazine that had this unbelievably good and grim reporting about this program Lavender that Israel was using to target Hamas militants, but also ensnaring Palestinian civilians in their kill chain. And so this was an AI powered kill chain, and it was killing some Hamas militants, but it was also killing a lot of civilians. And there was a margin of human civilian death that was like pretty egregious. But anyways, when the reporting came out about this Lavender program, this is what Ronan Bergman had to say about it.
Someone, I think that the attempt to describe as if there is a computer somewhere who chooses targets, and the computer is finalizing the targets, and the computer is sending the choppers or the drones or the helicopters or the fighting aircraft. I think that's wrong. I think that someone compare that with someone who is sitting in some kind of a cable network service network point and giving service to people that have malfunctions, and then the AI get the information much easier. At the end of the day, the question is not why an AI chose wrong, or not why the Israelis have given that to an AI. I think this is too much. Then I'm not sure it happened. What I do believe is that there needs to be a thorough research and a thorough look into how the Israelis chose their targets and what kind of supervision, oversight were put before the war and immediately.
So Ronan Bergman, when the Lavender reporting came out about Israeli AI targeting of Hamas, he compared it to a fucking Netflix show. He dismissed it as fanciful, as like an exaggeration, unrealistic. But then the fucking New York Times just reported about the exact same program, and their reporting on it. This is fucking nuts. Let me see if I can pull this up. Their reporting on it had Ronan Bergman on the byline. He was one of the 7 reporters that contributed to this shit. And ironically, this is kind of funny. The New York Times reported this as previously unreported, right? The order to use lavender, to use AI targeting of Hamas militants, right? Previously unreported. So there's no discussion in the New York Times piece at all about Ronan Bergman's previous comments on this. There's no discussion about how he dismissed it before, but now they're reporting on it. I guess it's a good thing that they're reporting on it, but also troubling, like this is a real thing. The Washington Post also did a story about this. The thing I wanted to show, let me see. So when I think people know this. I teach strategic studies, among other things. I teach a course on strategic studies. Last year, I gave a lecture about this lavender program, and I want to share a couple slides about how to think about this AI on the battlefield in Gaza, and the sort of like how grotesque it is, but also maybe like the larger implications. So I have like 2 or 3 slides that I'll share, and I'll make this as unlectury as possible. So, because y'all didn't pay for the lecture, but so, all right. First slide, okay. This is from the 972 reporting about it last year. So if Lavender decided, this is how the system works. If Lavender decided an individual was a militant in Hamas, they were essentially asked to treat that as an order with no requirement to independently check why the machine made that choice or to examine the raw intelligence data on which it is based. And so at 5 a.m., the Air Force would come and bomb all the houses that we had marked through the Lavender program, right? We took out thousands of people. We didn't go through them one by one. We put everything into automated systems. And as soon as one of the marked individuals was at home, he immediately became a target. We bombed him and his house. And this is one of the ways that it's so easy to ensnare civilians, because if a Hamas militant goes home to his family and you've marked him as a Hamas militant in the Lavender program, and you've marked his house as his house, then you bomb the house when he's there, even if there is collateral damage, right? So the Lavender program, it is a systematized way, an automated way to do mass killing, right? It functions as a way of creating distance from the kill, right? It nominally removes human judgment, which makes mass killing easier. It accepts an error rate, and the error could be as high as like 10%. It's unclear because this is all reporting. It's not Israel telling us. There's no accountability for this, huge problem, right? And it's marked just in the last like year, 2 years now. It marked some 37,000 Palestinians as suspected Hamas militants. Most of them, and then when you mark them, it means they're going to be assassinated. Most of them were junior Hamas militants. And so what the Lavender program has enabled, like it used to be too expensive and manpower intensive for the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, or Israeli intelligence to go after individual Hamas militants who were low level, corner boys, the equivalent, the militant version of like corner boys. You're not going to use a bunch of resources to try and deal with those lower level people. Well, with the Lavender program, you can just go after everybody and it makes it easier, which means more killing, right? And this is important. So this is another quote from the 972 piece. Everything that was in the New York Times piece was already in the Lavender piece from last year, the 972 piece, right? But It says, quote, "The idea of causing mass devastation to civilian areas for strategic purposes was formulated in previous military operations in Gaza, according to the doctrine in a war against guerrilla groups such as Hamas or Hezbollah. Israel must use disproportionate and overwhelming force while targeting civilian and government infrastructure in order to establish deterrence and force the civilian population to pressure the groups to end their attacks." This is fucked. Okay. What they're talking about, I don't think I've talked about this on here, but Israel has its own like pet theory of deterrence, or it calls it its theory of deterrence, which is called mowing grass, mowing the lawn. And the idea is that from time to time, you have to go on the offense and actually kill militants, kill terrorists, even before they attack you, not just in retaliation. And the Ronan Bergman guy, he actually wrote a book called Rise and Kill First about the Israeli, basically state terrorist program, you know? But that like, and so they're fairly mask off about this. And in like the various journals of strategic studies, they outline in very technocratized, intellectualized detail why they think it's logical to go on the offensive against the enemy. And I didn't mean to have this tie in with the Ender's Game discussion at the beginning of the episode, but the fascist planet, one of the signs of its fascism, its totalitarian governance, was going on the offensive against the enemy, but framing it in terms of deterrence and framing it as this thing that they're doing for their self-defense. We call it defense, but yes, it actually involves a genocide of another people. And in Ender's Game, in fact, that's what Earth did. What Ender Wiggin orchestrated, the strategist hero guy, he got tricked into leading a genocide. He thought it was a simulation, but it was real. Leading a genocide against the Formex. He destroyed their entire planet. That genocide was an offensive campaign led by fascist Earth. And the genocide was rationalized as deterrence, as self-defense, as mowing the fucking lawn. Doesn't that sound familiar? Right? So logically, like I could do a fucking imminent critique of this on its own terms. This doesn't make sense. Look at Israel's security situation. Is Israel more secure? It's the least secure state in the world. There is no state more besieged, more like surrounded, more isolated in world opinion than Israel. And they've caused it for themselves. They did this. They made the bed that they are responding to. It's a mixed metaphor. They made the bed that they're sleeping in, but they caused this situation where they are the most insecure nation on earth. They're doing things. Mowing the lawn creates new militants. New militants creates new confrontations, new sources of friction, new terrorist events. When Israel responds to that more and more with militarism itself, more mowing the lawn, offense, but calling it defense, guess who benefits from that politically? Fascists, the far right, Bibi Netanyahu. Militarism benefits reactionaries politically. Militarism makes you less secure. Militarism serves nobody except for certain sections of capital, like defense industrialists and the politicians who get fucking paid by them, which is disproportionately right-wing politicians. That is fucked, you know? So that's, I could go on more and more. I have this whole AI lecture, but that's pretty fucked. Let me check out the chat here. Sorry, I was on one for a minute. Van, do you know about the new economic thinking channel on YouTube? I have not heard of that, but I will check it out. I do know Yuan Ang. I've read the like Chinese corruption capitalism book, China's Gilded Age. That's the book by Yuan Ang. And yeah, I'll have to check out the New Economic Thinking channel. I'm all about that. Orthodox. So political economy is super important. It's actually super important to how I think about geopolitics. But orthodox or like neoclassical economics, like the stuff that I was taught when I first went through undergrad, the stuff that was like globalization is good stuff, that shit has taken us down the primrose path to hell. You know, like that shit's no good. But heterodox economic thinking is great. Marxist economic thinking is really important. You know, I don't co-sign it fully, but like I use a lot of Marxian concepts, you know. Yeah, so I'm all about new economic thinking, or at least entertaining it, you know. Like I actually get a lot of, I don't know if pleasure is the right word, but like I find it very useful and kind of satisfying to think about radical stuff and to read radical stuff. And it doesn't always, I don't always like embrace it necessarily, or like doesn't mean I think it's right, but like radical content is very, it forces you to think critically in ways that like normal shit does not. Oh, I'm going to be canceled for being not fully Marxist. I'm just not dogmatic about it. And also like, I think some of you guys probably know this, but like I occupy this weird space where I still get a lot of like normie libs and national security state bros who are like part of my audience. And it's actually remarkable that I can talk about class conflict and anti-imperialism and have them still tune in. Like, how many people can say that? Like, I mean, none, you know? And so I'm critical of them, and yet they tune in. Not all of them, not even most of them, but some of them. So if you're a Marxist, welcome to the show, brother or sister. But I keep in mind I'm trying to like reach a sort of wide audience. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe the CIA, if the CIA sponsored this show, I would have more followers, I feel like, you know. Yeah, anyways. So that's that. There's one more thing I think that I was gonna share. Hold on, let me stop this. Okay. There we go. What the fuck? Okay, here we go. So, drop site news, which is very good. They had filmed an event where Mehdi Hassan, who runs the new news outlet, which is also excellent, called Zateo, he sat down with Cori Bush, Congresswoman, and Cori Bush, as you probably know, she has lost her congressional seat directly because of AIPAC interference in the American election. What else is new? AIPAC went after every Justice Democrat, anyone who supported Israel, or not Israel, anyone who supported Gaza got attacked, roasted. Israel, AIPAC, the lobbying arm for Israeli foreign policy, they threw tons of money, record spending on candidates who opposed pro-Gaza politicians, pro-Palestinian politicians. Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman were the two biggest like casualties of that spending. So come next year, Cori Bush is out. She came to Congress on the wave of Black Lives Matter because she's from Missouri. And that's where like Ferguson happened, where Black Lives Matter started in 2014. Anyways, so she sat down with Mehdi Hassan and talked to him about, or she, well, just listen to the clip. This is a great way to end things. Wait, what's going on in the chat here? Van has denied communism even after relentless pressure from Jake. Wait, Jake who? Jake Sullivan? Or Jake from the American Prestige Pod? I don't know. Yeah, I have denied communism. I found out that there are a couple. So I had, if you're into the deep cuts on the Undiplomatic podcast, I had Malcolm Harris on the show about a year and a half ago. And he self-identified, I didn't know this at the time, but he self-identifies as a California communist. And I found that to be like, kind of like, whoa. Extreme in a way. I'm not saying that prejudicially, but like extreme, and what he clarified that he meant by it was like basically Mike Davis. And so Mike Davis at one point, before he died, he identified as a California communist. So there's a tradition of California communism, which is like it's just non-revolutionary Marxism. It's basically democratic socialism supporting economic populism. Like they're not trying to like really overturn anything. They're they could fit within DSA. Like it's Bernie supporters, economic populism, but the brand California communism harkens back to this tradition that goes back to the 1930s and earlier. John Steinbeck had flirtations with this. Anyway, it's the only communist I've had on the show so far, but it was a really good discussion. And if you're a follower of the Undiplomatic podcast on Twitch, I will not judge your communism. Okay. You're welcome here. So let's see. Okay. So Cori Bush. So I'm not going to show the entire thing from this Cori Bush interview, but there's a little 4-minute segment that is like fantastic, and also like a little bit of lesson learning. There's something worth commenting on about it. Student co-hosts like 3 years ago. Yeah. So the first, again, this is for chat. The Undiplomatic podcast started in 2019, early 2019. And in the first, it's gone through like 4 iterations of what the show is, but for like the first 2 iterations up until like 2022, the show was co-hosted with some of my former students. And so they were, obviously Gen Z, and that was part of the idea. And so we were having a kind of intergenerational dialogue. But of course, if you're a grad student, if you're like a former grad student of mine, and you get your master's degree, you're probably looking to like join the workforce and have a full-time job, not be a podcaster for free, So they would have to like move on eventually. And the process of like backfilling them in became, and like finding, quality people on the mic, that just was like more work than it was worth. But also I had like done some polling of listeners of the Undiplomatic podcast, and they were like, well, we would be interested. I asked like what they liked and what they would like more of. One of the things they wanted more of was interviews with guests, and more solo rants. Like sometimes I go off, literally, like, what are these dumpster fire episodes that I do? Solo rants, you know what I mean? But interviews with guests, talk about their new books or new movies or whatever it is that they had come out. And so starting in like 2022, I started doing like a lot more interviews with authors and that kind of thing. And that's great. I still do that. I've got a couple lined up in the new year, actually. But the format as of last year changed, where I do some of these solo episodes. I do solo live streams like you're listening to now. But I also have two new co-hosts who are like stable anchors, Matt Duss and Julia Gledhill. Julia, great critical defense head. Like, she's like an expert at defense policy stuff, but from a critical and anti-war perspective, And then Matt Duss, I'm sure a bunch of you know, he was Bernie's foreign policy advisor during the 2020 presidential campaign, also before that, also after that. And now he's the vice president at the Center for International Policy, which is like a progressive foreign policy think tank. But he's great. So we're the team that does our variety episodes. The holidays is all fucked up, the schedule, but normally we do 2 episodes together, the 3 of us, each month. And then on the in-between weeks, I do 1 or maybe 2 dumpster fire type episodes like this. The live streaming on Twitch is a very new thing, but I'm enjoying it, and it's leading to a lot of good content that I can then like clip out on YouTube later, and like so I've been doing it a lot more, and I'm trying to get the followers up, So all of that is the Undiplomatic podcast. So at the moment, there are no students or former students involved in the show. Maybe there will be in the future. Strong accent. The old co-hosts, the Kiwi co-host. Dude, the Kiwi accent is no offense if there are any Kiwis who are going to hear this, but like, it's so hard to understand. It's like my kid has the Kiwi accent now too, which is kind of hilarious and cute. But man, I struggle to understand what people are saying to me. Even now, I've been in New Zealand for like, I don't know, 7 years, 8 years, something like that. I'll ask somebody what they said once, and if I don't catch it the second time they say it, I'll just nod my head and pretend that I got it. It's super fucked. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe other people have a easier time with it, but I'm guessing not. So, anyways, no shade, by the way. An accent is an accent, But back to the Cori Bush. The Cori Bush finale thing here. So this is Cori Bush with Mehdi Hassan. It's wonderful, and there's something to be learned from this. Let me see if I can play this.
Congresswoman Bush, I'm not going to say this without any hyperbole. I think history will remember that you sacrificed your career for the biggest moral cause of our time.
That's because she lost her seat, because AIPAC went after her, and they went after her because she was a leading advocate for Palestinian rights and for Gaza, and speaking out against the genocide and trying to demand a ceasefire. That's what she sacrificed. Oh, Fancy Philip Floppy phone banked for Cori Bush. Yeah, this is your fault. You should have phone banked harder. You shit the bed, and now she lost, and AIPAC won, and the far right global takeover has begun. Do you see the cascade of nightmares you have caused us because you didn't phone bank strongly enough? All right, sorry. Here we go. Keep going.
A very simple question. Why?
I ran, first of all, thank you all for that. I ran for this seat to be what I needed and what I wanted to see. And I ran for this seat saying that if it means my name, my reputation, and my money, I was going to do the work to save lives and do the work for those who have been most directly negatively impacted by policy violence. And I'll never forget being out there on the streets of Ferguson, again, with our Palestinian brothers and sisters, putting themselves on the line for us because they didn't have to. Like, you know, we were out there getting tear gassed, real bullets, rubber bullets, you know, just all of dogs being unleashed. We were out there fighting day after day, night after night. Rain, sleet, hail, snow, hell no, we won't go. And they didn't have to be there. But not only that, they locked arms with our Jewish community. They locked arms with our AAPI community and so many others, our Latinx community, and everybody locked arms, LGBT, everybody locked arms together. And I'll never forget this one night. There was this white woman, this white pastor, 4 feet something, little. I'm 5'3", like I'm.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, there was this 16-year-old that was, you know, he was FTP, you know what it was.
Police.
Yes. And that's what he was saying. He just kept chanting it. And the police officer, we were at the police lineup and he kept saying it. And this police officer got so mad just at the words. He didn't touch anyone. Montega's shaking his head. Yes, because he remembers. It didn't touch him. And the police officer picked up his baton and was coming down to crack him over the head. And I'm standing there next to him and I'm looking and I'm like, it was dark outside. And there was this white woman. She reached up in the air and she caught the baton in the air and you could hear it go. She caught it and she just held it. And the police officer was looking like, what just happened? But then he backed down, he pulled it away and he walked away. And I just remember in that moment thinking, this is who we have to be. When I thought about our Palestinian community members, but not only those that came over, that delegation from Palestine, how they put themselves on the line, how our Hispanic and Latinx community, how they could have been deported and they still showed up for us. So that's why. It's because when they weren't the most impacted, they stood up for us. And so I'm not the most impacted, but my sister, I had to sit and listen to my sister when this happened and how she was being demonized and villainized and how her mother was not yet back in the United States. We were hoping she would get out. And I had to sit there and think about how can we burden her with trying to put together a ceasefire now resolution and make her be the one to stand up and fight for her own people.
So she's talking about Rashida Tlaib right there, who's a Palestinian American, and she's been the leading voice within the Congress for a ceasefire resolution on Palestine, and of course, you know, suspending military aid to Israel, obviously. And so Cori Bush was riding hard with her.
When somebody else can help hold her back up. And so I said, because somebody else held my back up, I'm going to hold hers up if she wants. And she made the decision, sis, I need help. And so I said, I'll put myself on the line for you. I'll take the attacks first. You can stand next to me or behind me, but I will take the attacks first. And because my sister deserved that. And so that's why I put myself on the line. And let me say this, and I'm going to move, Mehdi. Someone said to me, well, why would you do that? You're a champion on reproductive freedom. You're a champion on unhoused rights. You're a champion on this, and that. And don't you know that that's, you know, you should still be in Congress doing that work. Well, let me say this. If we save one life in Gaza, if we save one family in Gaza, it was worth it. And I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't take it back. If I had the opportunity to do it again, I would still
goosebumps.
Introduce that ceasefire now resolution and do the exact same thing.
Holy shit. Amazing. Goosebumps, man. Yeah, so like what she's talking about, especially with the police bringing down the nightstick and then a white woman, grabbing it. That's like the ultimate expression of solidarity. Like that's solidarity. Solidarity is the power of the people, and it shouldn't be lost on anybody that like that's why AIPAC and Israel targeted her and targeted Jamal Bowman, and that's what US foreign policy is doing. US foreign policy serves Israel because it serves AIPAC. And that means that US foreign policy is why America has no people power in it. It has no clean elections. And next year, it will have no Cori Bush and no Jamal Bowman. US foreign policy is directly in conflict with the politicians who most directly represent social democracy. Think about that. US foreign policy is in conflict with the possibility of US social democracy. How fucked is that? One last thing, and then I'm going to try to raid someone if someone's available. But one last thing is, this is crazy. A little clip from the it's from Novara Media, but it's with the Socialist Rifle Association. And I had not heard of this group, but it's kind of like fascinating and worthwhile to think about. So I'm just going to play like 30 seconds of this shit. Let's see.
Revolts and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily a central part of the organizing that we as an organization it is, but broadly on the left, I don't think it is, and I don't think it should be. I just think that as an organization, we need to specialize in this skill and this topic because it's just a role that needs to be filled. I think it's a skill to have in your back pocket and to better have it and not need it, especially with the right-wing organizing is centrally around guns and is centrally around hurting people and going after parts of our community. Even if you're some leftist who believes that they're going to really make the biggest change in the world and going after like international capitalism, and you start making headways, historically, they just kill those people. If you think you're going to have a revolution and it's going to be a peaceful one, like you're probably going to lose. I'm not advocating for violence. I'm not advocating for some overthrow of the government. I just want people to be able to defend themselves.
So it's the whole thing is like a great interview, but it's like a 40-minute sort of documentary almost. Kind of fascinating. I just want to I don't know what people feel about this shit, like if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have been a huge advocate of gun control in America. And I'm definitely an advocate for gun abolition in schools, like there shouldn't be any fucking guns in the classroom or anything like that. But like communities have to defend themselves. I don't have any problem with what the Socialist Rifle Association guy was saying there, like I have no problem with that whatsoever. There does need to be some portion of the movement that has weapons competency. Everybody doesn't need to have weapons competency, just like everybody on the left doesn't need to be a foreign policy expert. But some people got to know that shit. Some people got to understand what the dark arts are, how this shit works. And that extends to martial arts, jujitsu, extends to weaponry, combat operations. There should be people that know that stuff. The thing that I'm not so sure about is this idea of well, if you're a nonviolent protester, historically, you just get killed. Well, no. Historically, if you take up arms in opposition of the government, you get killed. The Black Panthers were targeted primarily. I mean, they were white supremacy, right? And anti-communist hysteria. Like the FBI was going to find a reason to go after the Black Panthers no matter what. Of course. But the reason they did go after the Black Panthers in terms of their actual justifications, it's because they were doing It's because of the arms. It was because they were engaged in illegal weapons trafficking. That's what they got nailed with. When they ended up in shootouts with the fucking police that were like ended up doing armed robberies sometimes, that became the reason to say these are enemy number one. If you're a good white America, they're your enemy. And here's proof. It's the guns. You know what I mean? The guns become a reason to securitize the threat from the left. And in that respect, I think it's important for the left to remain nonviolent. You know what I mean? I also think that like the state, I have larger thoughts about this that I'm writing, but like the state, it doesn't have a monopoly on violence, but the balance of forces between state and society, violence favors the state. The state is like violence is a terrain on which the state wins 99.9% of the time. And so that's not the terrain that you want to fight on because it's too unfavorable. And I think I'm not going to judge other people for their methods, but like I think that if your goals, and as the left, this is our goals, peace, democracy, and equality, those goals are not well served by instruments of violence. Violent means to achieve non-violent ends. Israel could say that's what it's doing in Gaza. Violent means to non-violent ends. You know what I mean? It's a fucking joke, but like they could say that, and so like you don't want to be in that position of having to say that. Do you think they should teach gun safety in high school? Yes, actually, so I kind of do, and yes, I bring jujitsu into every conversation. So jujitsu is on my mind like all the time. I've never done anything in my life that's as hard as jujitsu, or as like mind consuming as jujitsu. Like international relations is a distant second, gun safety in high school would be good. I don't think it should be like mandatory. And I'm not a fan of guns myself, honestly, but gun safety is smart. And that's like the Socialist Rifle Association in that video. That's mostly what they were talking about. It was like, it's a gun safety group that has a socialist politics, so it's not a militia, it's not an armed militant group. So I have no problem with what they're doing. Yeah. You can choose the terrain sometimes, like you have to look at where, there's a larger debate about this. You should contest every terrain that's political, but violence is like a means, you don't have to use certain means, and the means and the ends have to align. There's like a larger philosophical discussion that we'll probably need to pick up another day. But like, I don't think countering state violence with violence is actually effective. But my caveat to that is always self-defense. I'm not a pacifist. Pacifism is like too hard. I can't do it. If someone's attacking you, you have to defend yourself. The problem is when you start thinking in terms of like my self-defense requires, or like you use metaphors to say that you're under attack. And this is how you get back to the Ender's Game situation or the Israeli mowing grass situation, where you're going on the offensive. You're the fucking bad guy. If you're going on the offense, you're the bad guy. But you're calling it defense. And everybody likes to call what they're talking about self-defense. When you're doing it, it's self-defense. When anyone else does it, it's aggression. That's problematic. And so one of the philosophical difficulty is in understanding what the boundaries of self-defense are. But I think self-defense is like a legitimate thing always. But that doesn't mean it's consequence free. I've been reading Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. I read it a few years ago for the first time, and I've been rereading it again. And everybody reads him as like almost a philosopher of violence or an advocate of violence. And it's like, that first chapter is like that for sure, right? Or like it justifies violence, but the whole rest of the book is like the consequences, the price that you pay for having opened up that Pandora's box of violence. And so it's like you don't want to actually go down that path. And I read the book as like he hates violence. Fanon hates violence, you know, and it fucked Algeria. Algeria has been fucked ever since independence because the way that it got free, the only way it could get free was with revolutionary violence, you know? So it's like, you got to do what you got to do. And okay, you know, you're going to have to use suicide bombs and terrorism and stuff, take up arms against the state. If that's what you're going to do, that's what you're going to do. But there's going to be consequences. Even if it succeeds, there's going to be huge consequences, soul destroying consequences. And that's why I'm like, I feel like violence is just, that's not a way to win if you can at all avoid it, you know? So anyways, I'm preaching now. Sorry about that. Can I raid somebody? Is there someone to raid? I could raid Hassan Piker, but like that's like pouring a glass of water into the ocean, isn't it? So, oh, is there a leftist streamer? Yeah. Let's try this. Polymo. Booyah. We're gonna raid, folks. This is gonna work. This is gonna happen this time. All right. Booyah. Booyah. Here we go, babies. All right. Peace.